Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Hello, everyone. This is Lois Sonstegard. I'm here today with Dr. Terry Jackson. He's an executive advisor. He's a thinker in terms of leadership and organizational consultant. And he works with the State Department doing a lot of different things. And I'm going to have you just tell us a little bit about what it is that he does do with the State Department, and how he also began working with some very interesting clients like Pakistan. So Terry, I will let you introduce yourself, but before you do, I think you're a little bit on the humble side, so I am going to tell everybody about the award that you will be receiving in November, mid-November. And it's the Thinkers 50 World Leadership in Coaching Award that is given out in London every year. And this November, Terry Jackson is the recipient of that award. So congratulations to you.
Oh, thank you so very much. Well, wow. Where do I begin? As it relates to the State Department, a friend of mine sent me an email and said, hey, I have a very interesting opportunity that I think that you would be interested in. And it included going to Pakistan to speak for the State Department to entrepreneurs in Pakistan. So there were two positions they were looking for. One was leadership and the other was marketing. And then looking at the criteria, I said, hey, I can do that. So I completed the process, emailed it to the contact in Pakistan, went through actually a scenario where I had to interview for them to understand that I did have the skill set based upon the conversation. And upon that,
Did you interview? Was it Pakistanis or the State Department?
I interviewed with the State Department, members of the State Department who were assigned to Pakistan, in Islamabad to be exact. Once I went through that process and I was approved, then, of course, they began to send me the agenda as to where they wanted me to speak, what they wanted me to speak on. It was a full week of speaking about 10 to 12 hours a day around entrepreneurial leadership and entrepreneurial marketing. Their goal was to increase the business acumen for entrepreneurs in Pakistan. They have some great technical minds there. They don't understand marketing and how to take products to market. And so that's why I was there.
Got it. What an incredible opportunity. Not many people work in Pakistan or have the familiarity to be able to do that. So what an incredible gift that you were able to bring to them, but then also bring back to us here in our country. What were your biggest learnings, do you think? One or two learnings that you took away from that experience?
You know, never having been to Pakistan before, and, you know, you read the news. I think a week before I went to Pakistan, there was a bombing. And so I was like, wow, there was a bombing in Pakistan. They need to get together before I get over there. So, you know, landing there, seeing that basically what they wanted out of life, the same things we wanted. It was no different. You know, it was one takeaway, is that they wanted the same thing we wanted. They wanted to be successful. They wanted to be successful entrepreneurs. The second thing was the fact that, you know, where we take marketing for granted, because we understand everything is about really taking your product to the market, being able to develop a marketing campaign that will convince consumers to purchase. They didn't have the knowledge of that. I kind of attribute it to the country and its religious philosophy, with the majority being Muslim. Wasn't as open a community, which means communications are not there, which means the ability to develop those kinds of marketing campaigns to convince someone that creativity and that innovation was not a part of their culture, because it's more of a culture where you have your ancestors or your elders and you sit to them, and for you to say, well, I have this new idea that I'd like to be able to promote, it's just not a part of their culture.
So, is your work with them ongoing, or was it time limited?
It was limited, but I was able to create some relationships there from some other entrepreneurs. That is ongoing conversation that I have on a regular basis now.
Good for you. You know, Terry, with the things that you have done, I know that you also are a member of the Marshall Goldsmith 100, which is a very prestigious group of people. Marshall chose from, I believe, 17,000 different applicants, 100 people that he would will or give everything that he knew. And you are one of those people. And it is in one of the MG 100 meetings that I met you. And one of the things that impressed me was the sense of what it is that you're creating and building. And so one of the things that you work on is legacy building. What is that next future piece? And if you could share a little bit about that, that would be wonderful.
Well, yes, it is a prestigious honor to be a part of the Marshall Goldsmith 100. Again, you mentioned that there were roughly about 17,000 applications, and I was fortunate to be chosen as one of those members of the group. And it's been a wonderful experience and a great deal of learning. As we talk about legacy, one of the things that struck me as I look throughout industry, as I look across business on a global basis, is that I remember being in undergraduate and studying business and marketing and management, and I saw a great deal of management gurus were able to read their books. But one of the things that I noticed as I saw those giving speeches and reading their books, there wasn't any top management guru, say like a Tom Peters or a Marshall Goldsmith, looked like me. None were African American. And, we're talking 1984, 1985. And so as I fast forward, to the day, and I look around still from a global perspective, and I look at those top management gurus, the Seth Godins of the world, the Simon Sineks of the world, the Daniel Pinks of the world, still the Marshall Goldsmiths, I don't see anyone who looks like me. So part of my legacy is to be able to what I call clean up the sticky floor and smash the glass ceiling. I've been given a platform, if you will, being a part of the Marshall Goldsmith, to be in the company of some of the world's best thinkers as it relates to business. And hopefully by being in that company and being able to learn from them, I can ascend to that kind of level. I'm not trying to be the level of a Marshall Goldsmith, but the world giving demographic changes in the world has to see people of color who are considered to be experts in management and business as well. Because as I look throughout corporate America, as I look over globally, not a lot of people, let me say African Americans more specific, who are not in those types of positions. And I like to be able to leave that kind of legacy, along with being able to build a coaching consulting practice that is sustainable once I transition from here.
So I'd just like to go back for a moment, because sticky floor, I think people understand glass ceiling, but when you talk about sticky floor, what are you talking about?
When I talk about a sticky floor is, some people don't have the same type of opportunities as others. And as a result, even though they're on the bottom floor, they don't get the opportunity to ascend higher levels. And that is what the sticky floor actually means, is having the same opportunities. We can relate it to diversity and inclusion. If we take a look at corporate America and we take a look at top executives, you will see, and not only from a person of color perspective, but even from a woman's perspective, when we take a look, there's something that keeps people in a certain position. Whether you want to call it the system, good old boy network, keep certain people at a position, and I call that the floor. Okay. I've done my research on the Fortune 500 companies in America. Fortune 500 started in 1955. And since 1955, there have only been 13 CEOs who are of African American descent. And that's quite a long time. So, be able to break those molds or not have those opportunities mean that somewhere on the floor that people are getting stuck and they're not having the opportunity to prove uh, their worth as a CEO.
As you do that, Terry, you're working with corporations today
Yes.
regarding that.
Yes.
Give a process you take people through in getting them off the sticky floor and then looking at how do you break through that glass ceiling?
Yes, that's a great question, because what we're talking about is a methodology, right? And so, you can look at best practices from leadership development, and you can study the best leaders. And then from that, we created a methodology. And actually, there are a couple of methodologies that I utilize. One, of course, is Marshall Goldsmith's stakeholder-centered coaching, because it's built around leadership and understanding what the gaps are and what gaps need to be closed in order to get there. And then there are some personal methodologies that's been created, as I have this, what I call a high performance leadership academy, which is actually a 2-month development process, looking at all of the quote unquote soft skills that are needed for leaders to ascend up the ladder. And it doesn't matter if you're a first level leader, a mid-tier leader, or an executive leader, those soft skills remain the same. And, that's really about how do you think comprehensively? How do you manage change? How do you communicate simply and powerfully so that one understands instruction or direction? What is the inner leader, of the game? How do you go about building your power base, which is basically your network? How to build a high performance culture. So these are modules that we take people through over a 10-month period of time, so that they can gain all the necessary leadership skills so they can be prepared to go to the next level of leadership, whatever that might be.
So as you've done that and offered it, what have been your biggest challenges that you've had to work through?
Some of the challenges have been being able to get into position to offer it. Meaning, again, I go right back to, being quote unquote a leadership expert, leadership guru, having to prove, even though, I had 15 to 20 years in corporate America. I ran a $500 million division of a firm, never missed a number in 5 years, still having to prove on a day-to-day basis, where I've seen others who didn't have to prove as much. And so, now the affiliation, of course, with Marshall Goldsmith, that brings more opportunities my way and has expanded my network exponentially. Now receiving the Thinkers 50, top 50 world leader in coaching, that expands my network and, those affiliation. And this past week, there's another organization called Thinkers 360. And I was, I guess, noticed by the Thinkers 360 as one of the top 20 global leaders on work of the future, what the workforce will look like in the future. So that was just last week that I received that. So those kinds of affiliations and awards are opening doors. And so I'm fortunate in that, and I'm grateful for that. And so just getting past having to have those affiliations in order to move forward is what the challenges are. Even though you have a PhD in management, and you have, and when I say you, meaning I I've worked in corporate America for companies like Mobil Oil, for Velasquez, Bristol Myers Squibb. Those names are names in industry, but and proving that I could perform at that level. Still moving into your own business as a expert, it took the affiliation in order to get there. So those were the obstacles: notoriety, a name in the marketplace, a brand, if you will.
So, Terry, what I'm hearing you say is the legacy that you really would like to leave and to build is a future workforce where minorities are able to move with a similar ease or difficulty, however, as other ethnic groups, racial groups, and that there are people who will coach those people so that they can move into top leadership roles, CEOs of major Fortune 105 companies. Correct?
I would let me add a little bit to that. And what I'd like to add is it should be based upon performance, not ethnicity or race. If I perform, I should be included in the ascension of the ladder based upon what my performance is. And so what I would challenge corporate America to do and challenge leaders in corporate America to do is let's place diversity to the side a little bit. Let's talk about inclusion, because inclusion is that's like being asked to dance when you're at being asked to dance while you're at the dance. Diversity is being invited to the dance. But if I'm not included, that means I haven't been asked to dance. It should be based upon performance and not a network or a network that decides because you're not a part of a certain group, because you're not a part of quote unquote the minority of the majority in the workforce. And I don't like the word minority whatsoever, because that gives it has a connotation of inferior to it, right? You got the majority and you have
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, you have the majority and then you have the minority, right? And so the minority really means that I'm inferior to the majority, and that's not the case whatsoever. So it's about really challenging the status quo. A part of my legacy should be challenging the status quo, and that's what I'm doing when I say I'm looking to build and leave the sticky floor and smash the glass ceiling. It's really about what the status quo is and has been for quite some time.
So always there's roadblocks, right? And the interesting thing is that, you take a look at Sally Helgeson's book on how women rise, right? Mm-hmm. It's a similar issue in terms of what are the roadblocks that women put in their way that keep them from getting into those top positions. It's almost like you need to do that sequel book on what are the roadblocks that perhaps African Americans have put in their way or are seemingly naturally there that prevent them. And like with Sally, it's more of a perception. It's the women who perceive, right? But you have to know what those are in order to overcome them.
I would agree. It's interesting because as it relates to Sally's book, How Women Rise,
yes,
those perceptions, I did some research a couple of years ago as I was doing a workshop for 20 top women leaders at New York Life. In my research, I came across a study done at Harvard University. And that study showed that women over 40 who are in executive positions outperform their male counterparts in every area of performance. That's not a study that's been widely shared with a lot of people, but I was really surprised at that. So I shared that particular study. And so I guess a lot of that could fall back onto maybe a woman being married, having a family, being a nurturer, and how they're able to perform and navigate the corporate world. That's why they clearly outperform men. So I was surprised by that. So when we look at Sally's book and she talks about some of the self-sabotaging things that women do in corporate America, that's a conditioning process. Women have been conditioned to not be, quote unquote, seen as aggressive. You know, the right word is probably assertive, not seen to be a certain way, or uh, and I'm going to use the word minority to include women. Anyone who's not, quote unquote, a white male who actually displays those kinds of behavior are categorized the same way. And so that's what we have to deal with as it relates to diversity and inclusion, and Sally's book, because same people who have those perceptions of women are the same people who have perceptions of African Americans who could potentially be in leadership positions.
So as you face these challenges, Terry, what are some of the ways that you've gone about trying to deal with them and overcome the challenges?
Well, you know, growing up, one of the things I've always heard is that you have to be 2 to 3 times better. And so, you know, with that, you have to be able to focus. One, you have to be able to study who your peers are that you're competing against, because the business world is about competition, right? If you're in a sales position, or if you're in a management position and you're seeking to perform well, or you're seeking promotion, then you have to understand who it is you're competing against. So you have to do your intelligence to understand a little bit about that person. And then once you understand, you also have to assess your strengths and what your weaknesses are. And, you know, I believe in strengthening my strengths versus strengthening my weaknesses. And with that, what I do is I approach people as individuals, and I work with people who, for the most part, may be working with me, and I treat them as human beings. So, in assessing myself and assessing others, my goal is to ensure that I inspire someone else to perform. So, therefore, if I'm inspiring them to perform, I'm inspiring myself to perform. So, I want to go into any position more than prepared, understanding who my quote unquote friendly competition is within the workplace, and then outthink them and outwork them.
So, Terry, you started this process of really thinking about legacy and how do you work with people while you were in school, while you were getting educated. You've taken this process with you throughout your work career.
Yes.
What was it in your younger years that brought you to this point? There must have been a pivotal experience or conversation with somebody that allowed you to see that this could be part of who you would be.
That's a very interesting question, and I keep telling the story about coming up in high school and being a jock, if you will, football, basketball, and baseball. I was an athlete. And I remember my senior year, I had on my leather jacket, and I was walking into a classroom, and it was a class that was considered to be the toughest or the highest level of vocabulary class that one could take at the high school. And so as I walk in the door, I remember the teacher stopping me and asking me if I was going into the right class. And she asked me if anyone else had signed me up to take that particular course. And so I said, no, I signed up for it and I'm going into the right class. Now, those who were already sitting in the class knew me. So they knew, from experience of being in classrooms, that I took those kind of classes. She didn't know who I was. What she saw was the hue of my skin, and that I had on a leather jacket, and I was a big guy. So I'm an athlete, and maybe I was going to the wrong class. So what I decided to do, relying back on my competitiveness from playing sports, was to go in her classroom and sit down and say nothing until the first test. Prove her wrong. And so that's one of the things I always think about is proving someone wrong. And so taking that class and sitting there for the first 4 or 5 weeks, not saying anything, and taking that first test, I made a 96 out of 100. And at that time, he began to recognize me, began to speak to me, and asked me if I was even interested in attending her alma mater to play football. So it's always been proving someone else wrong. I'll give you another example. My last experience in corporate America, after I completed my PhD, there was an opportunity that presented itself to run the division of a company. And so I interviewed with a gentleman who would be one of my peers. The interview I thought went well, but he wasn't the decision maker. So at the end of the interview, I asked him, given the fact that we've had a successful interview process, if you were the one who would make the decision to hire me, would you? He said no. He went back to industry experience, not leadership experience, but industry experience. So I remembered that. So as I was hired, we were under the same leader. One of the things that stuck with me is that he said he wouldn't hire me. So I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. So my goal was to make sure that my numbers were better than his in every category every year while I was there. And I accomplished that. And so by the end of year 2, he was coming to me asking me about how I was leading my people. So it's always been about having to prove someone wrong, and being very quiet and letting my performance speak for itself.
In a sense, it's proving somebody wrong, maybe also proving to yourself that you can do it. Because I think for me, that's always been a dual process as a woman. There's also a test of yourself. Can I really do what I say I'm doing, right? And then as you discover you can, it's so reassuring. Yeah.
At this point, I'm extremely confident that anything that I set my mind to and I'm going to do, that I'm going to accomplish it. I've had those wins that have added up over a period of time, from Little League football to junior high football and baseball, high school, doing well in college, getting a master's, to earning a PhD. All of those are wins to me. And with those wins, I don't doubt myself. Others may doubt me because they don't know me. I never doubt what I'm capable of doing. I just take a strategy of, let me keep real quiet and they'll see, and then they'll come to me. So I don't doubt me. I always believe in me, because if you don't believe in yourself, no one else will. It's others who don't know you, and then sometimes there are those perceptions that play into all of this. But I never doubt I never doubt my capability.
So it's powerful to have that sense of self-assurance, right? And
Yes.
that's one of the things Gallup talks about, with really knowing what your strengths are. I want to just go to something that you talked about a little bit earlier, and that is, what do you see the future workforce will look like, and what do we need to do to get there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question that a lot of people are pondering at this point in time. If Google did a study a couple of years ago about what is really needed in the workforce as it relates to skill sets. And soft skills, what I call just the human interaction skills, are the skills that are much needed. We're going to see organizations that are much smaller. I would see that I'm going to call the revenue per employee is going to be much higher because the organizations are much smaller. They're going to be decentralized. A lot of them will be working from home. There'll be a great deal of robots doing some of the the menial and the mundane tasks that are very repetitive. But I think that provides opportunity, right? It provides opportunity for those to get into technology and not only just program the robots, but to build robots. It's going to be, most of our organizations are going to be very, very global, which is going to also present the opportunities for smaller organizations to work within specific communities. So it's going to be very interesting to see how we do business, what the skill sets are going to be, what new industries are going to be created as a result of the technology or the technological advances that are going to continue to happen. But regardless of all of the technological advances, business is built on the fundamentals, right? You have to be able to provide a product or a service at a cost that will allow you to make profit and minimize your cost at the same time. And so you're still going to have to be able to market and sell. You're still going to have to be able to produce. You're still going to have to be able to please and wow your customers. So regardless of what the industries are or may be, fundamentals will remain the same.
Do you see that there will be more opportunities for all of us because of smaller groups, smaller businesses? Right now, as companies have gotten larger, the positions at the top are fewer, right? They've decreased. And do you see that is going to begin to shift, or what's your sense?
Well, my sense is we're going to become more of an entrepreneurial type of environmental culture. Smaller size businesses are going to drive people to create new businesses, create their own business. And with that, these entrepreneurs are going to have to pick up the necessary business skills and acumen. So I see more smaller organizations than large organizations happening, and more entrepreneurship and the large corporate organizations happening. They're going to be able to innovate, because innovation, of course, is totally different from disruption. Innovation is just, taking a look at something, repurposing it, using it a little differently than its original purpose, and being able to fill the need of a consumer. One of the things that I said in Pakistan, one of the things I continue to say here is this. As it relates to entrepreneurship is about solving problems. So every day when you wake up and you walk outside, look for a problem that needs to be solved, that the consumer is willing to spend that product or that service. And if you think like that, you'll see that there are all types of problems to be solved to make this world better. It's just a matter if you have the initiative and the persistence to create that product or service to be able to get to the marketplace.
Terry, we've been talking for almost half an hour at this point. Time goes much too quickly. Last thoughts that you want to leave and share with people in terms of what you've learned, advice that you have as people think about their own legacy and their future. How should they approach it? How should they think about it?
That's a very good question. And I think that if people can just remember that we're human beings dealing with other human beings, regardless of the process of robots in the marketplace, it takes human beings to create robots. In order to really to be successful, it takes people dealing with people. If we can understand that we are just humans working with other humans, put aside whatever our perceptions may be, our biases, and just see that person as I see myself, we could accomplish a lot more in this country and a lot more in the world if we see each other as human. When we begin the objectification of people by assigning a identifier to that person, liberal, conservative, right wing, left wing, whatever that person, however we identify that person, let's first and foremost see them as a human being and understand what our commonalities are and work from there. Not work toward differences, because no one ever comes together on differences. But as human beings, we have a lot of commonality. And if we can just work from there, I think the world will be a better place.
It's interesting. I was talking last week with a podcast that I did with a real estate broker out of Chicago. His dream is to bring 1,000 millionaires together to simply solve the problems that we face in our society. So rebuilding cities and doing things like that. But for him, in a sense, it was the same. It's looking beyond the differences, but looking at what are the issues, what are the problems, what do we have as unique skills that we can bring to solving some of those problems.
Yep, absolutely.
Terry, thank you so much. And again, thank you for your time and congratulations on your marvelous honor that you are going to have bestowed on you in November. And if any of you who are listening to the podcast would like to get in touch with Terry, simply send us an email and we'll find ways in which that information or your questions are communicated to him. So thank you very much for listening and for your time today. We look forward to seeing you again next week.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.